Hello, I am back and I am going to read to you the second chapter of Behind Closed Doors. And this chapter is entitled The Death of the Duke of Windsor, 1972. So I'm just going to bring up a picture of the Duke. So hope you can see that. Now we can get an image of him. So there he is. I think this is one of his later pictures. But this is a book, a fascinating book written by Hugo Vickers. It's a recent book. He started following the Duke and the Duchess and became very interested. He's a very good author, very thorough in his research, and he just has a very fascinating view. The book can be found on Amazon for $30. I cannot find it on Audible for anybody interested in it, but I do think he does a wonderful job and a wonderful presentation of the story of the Duke and the Duchess of Windsor, and he's got a very fair assessment of them. So I will just start reading. Chapter 2, The Death of the Duke. The Duke of Windsor had been ill since November 1971. The Queen was aware of the gravity of his condition. Messages has reached the palace in various ways, not least from Lady Monckton and Lady Alexandra Metcalfe, both of whom were old friends of the Windsors. The former was the widow of Walter Monckton, the latter the widow of the Duke's long-term equerry, Fruity Metcalfe. Edward Heath, the Prime Minister since June 1970, was prompted to consider the Duke of Windsor's plight by a stray letter from a 24-year-old. He raised this and his principal, Private Secretary Robert Armstrong. Some of us have long been worried about various aspects of the Duke of Windsor's position, especially in the evening of his life. There will no doubt be some who will ask why, if the Emperor of Japan was able to visit the Duke and the Duchess of Windsor in their home, it is not possible for the Queen to do the same for his uncle. An opportunity for the Queen to visit the Duke came during the state visit to Paris in May 1972. The invitation came from President Pompidou to celebrate Britain having joined the common market at the beginning of the year. It took place between the 15th and the 19th of May. The Queen duly arrived in Paris, was driven in an open car with the President to the Élysée Palace, attending a glittering ballet, a banquet at Versailles, and an equestrian performance by floodlight at the Champ de Mars. On Wednesday, the Queen and Prince Philip were joined by Prince Charles for a tour of the principal sites of the Roman Provence, visiting Arles and staying at l'Hosto de Beauharnais at Labat. The Queen came to Windsor's house after an afternoon at the Longchamp on the 18th of May. While on her way back into Paris, she was in her coat and hat from the races, while Prince Philip wore a camel hair overcoat and Prince Charles was in a light gray suit. But then I was back at my family home in Hampshire and in time to see the TV news bulletins of the Duchess of Windsor, elegant and in dark blue, coming out of the house with the Queen, Prince Philip, and Prince Charles looking upset and mournful. The Duke of Windsor was not seen. He was too ill to appear. Reporting of the visit was predictable. The Times stated, "The usual discretion is being observed about his Duke's health, but it has not been denied that he has been unwell recently." Paris Match noted, French I will not read, but the French press over-dramatized it by talking of official reconciliation, while the British press speculated about the truth behind the British embassy's reservations over the Duke's exact state of health. It was now public knowledge that the Duke of Windsor was a very sick man, even if it was not admittedly public. When a journalist asked Sir Martin Charteris, the Queen's private secretary, about the Duke's health, Sir Martin replied, "I know he's dying, you know he's dying, but we don't know he's dying." Over the next few days, John Utter was frequently quoted in the newspaper denying that there was a cause for concern, explaining away the arrival of Dr. Antonucci, the Duke's doctor from New York. But the fact that he is feeling weak after the operation, stated John Utter one day. His health is not very good. He said on another, "Dr. Antonucci is here for a while." As the week went on, the Duke's condition was described as unchanged or even a little better. The French papers printed that the Duke had cancer of the throat. This was politely denied. By 1971, the Duke was tired. He was fatigued, as the French put it, which means slightly more than that. The year the Duchess and he could not go to America, the Duke put his country house, the Moulin de Tulare, actually it was called the Mill, up for sale, and asked Miss Schutz to find him a house in the south of France, which the Duchess had always preferred. Latterly, she hated being at the Mill, though she enjoyed entertaining there. Even if the Paris house was more or less closed down, she would find an excuse to return and would soon be back in Paris, staying there and going out to see the collections of the courtiers. A prospectus was produced advertising the 18th century mill, its buildings, its 23 acres surrounding the gardens. It was offered through Previews Incorporated, New York, with a gardener's lodge, a guest cottage, a bachelor's quarters, a barn, or a trophy room. It was to be sold with the contents. Through some items, they were brought back to Paris, including the map of the Duke's world travels when he had been the Prince of Wales. In Paris, all the Duke wanted to do was stay at home each evening. During the last years, he hardly even knew where he was going when he went out. He used to ask Bauer, the chauffeur, what the plan was. The Duchess liked to go out. In a sense, she did not exist until she was seen. Neither the Duke nor the Duchess was well in 1971. Okay, this is key. This is the key piece right here. They weren't doing very well in 1971, and then the Duke died in 1972. And then afterwards, after the Duke dies, then Wallis is getting more sick. She was under some stress due to colitis or an ulcer. It's a nasty form of Crohn's disease which would affect her health for the rest of her life. Henry Hank Walter, their American attorney, visited them and was saddened by the Duke's obvious concern for his ailing wife. Soon it was the Duke's health that gave the graver cause for concern. On the 16th of November, he had treatment with Dr. Fleury at the American Hospital. 3 days later, he was visited by Dr. Antonucci. On the 10th of December, he was treated for his throat condition. On 4 February 1972, the Duke's cousin, Lord Mountbatten, called on the Windsors and was shocked by the Duke's decline. The Duke told him that he had been having deep X-ray treatment on his throat, and he thought it had worked, but now he was about to have a hernia operation. At that time, a film called The Woman I Love and starring Faye Dunaway was being planned by an American TV company. Mountbatten thought it was garnering much unfavorable publicity. He came up with a scheme that the Windsors should allow themselves to be filmed seated side by side on a sofa, reading out a statement which he, Mountbatten, had prepared repudiating the film. Wisely, Hank Walter advised against this since it was only giving more publicity to the film. Even then, Mountbatten told the Duke that he must have statements prepared to issue to the press if any questions were asked. On the 20th of February, the Duke was admitted to the American hospital under the pseudonym Mr. Smith. The matron decided that Miss Owen Shanley should look after him. She was an Irish nurse who had learned the healing powers from her father and had spent 20 years in a convent before seeking papal dispensation to go out into the public world to do her nursing. She met the Duke in his room in the presence of the Duchess of Perry-Cully, the governor of the hospital, and the Duke's French doctor, Jean Thin. The Duke was officially in the hospital for the hernia operation, but also for exploratory work on a throat tumor near the left carotid artery. This was judged completely successful, but the doctor discovered the tumor was inoperable. It was decided that it would be too distressing to the Duke and the Duchess to tell them that the Duke was unlikely to live more than 6 months. The Duke stayed in the hospital, his food being prepared by a chef and brought in from his house. On the 26th of February, when he insisted rather prematurely on going home. As Una Shanley had got on well with him, she went with him to nurse him. At this stage, the Duke was able to do a lot for himself. Miss Shanky noted that his first question each morning was, "Is the Duchess awake?" And if he was told that she would be the first to go to her room in his dressing gown. Later, they would have brunch together in the sitting room between their two suites, invariably having scrambled eggs with thin slices of bacon as well as a toast and tea. The Duke would then attend his correspondence and make his usual business telephone calls. In the evening, they would have dinner together, and sometimes Una would join them. This would be served on a small table in the library downstairs. At night, Black Diamond, the Duke's pug, used to sleep on his bed. In due course, the Duke needed no more post-operational care, and Una left, promising to return if needed. On her departure on the 1st of March, the Duchess gave her a brooch with an ivory eyelet with sapphire rings of rod and ovals. On the 2nd of March, the Duke began to go into the American hospital 3 times a week for treatment. But otherwise, he was at home, wishing to spare the Duchess from having to visit him in the hospital. If he knew how ill he was, he never addressed the subject. He used to tell John Utter, "It's the treatment that's making me feel so bad." The Duke was well enough to attend a small dinner at Paul Louis Weller's house and in the Rue de la Fonsandre on the 21st of April, at which his friend Jean-Louise Marguet, who painted well, was present. Dr. Antonucci came over from New York to see the Duke on the 29th of April, and on the 12th of May there was a last joint dinner party for 10 people at the house. Lady Moseley recalled that the Duke went on coming down to dinner even though he could hardly speak or either barked or whispered. At the time she wrote, "The last time we saw him, his poor voice had almost gone, and he looked so ill, and he made one feel miserably sad. Yet he was marvelous. He was making jokes, and he was interested in everything." And that's happening in the world. He was interested in everything that's happening in the world without a thought to himself. By this time, a mere 5 weeks after she had left, Una was back on duty at the house. She was saddened by what she saw. The Duke was thinner, weaker, and his voice was hoarser. He underwent coughing spasms and suffered from fever, but all he ever wanted to know was if he would be well enough to dine with the Duchess. Likewise, he wanted her to remain social. He wanted her to entertain with her friends, and above all, not worry about him. On the evening of 10 May, Una had the evening off. She returned at midnight and looked in on the Duke. She found him very agitated, and then he suddenly suffered a total cardiac collapse. She injected cortisone into him and massaged his heart. His French physician, Dr. Jean Thin, had summoned and followed the day. Dr. Franz Joachim installed an intravenous drip. The Duke was aware that he had nearly died, but he did not want the Duchess to be told of the heart attack. But when the Duke was confined to his room, Diana Moseley wrote, "We were invited to dinner on the eve of the Queen's visit to France, and that night he was too ill to come down. I can't tell you how sad that was." One realized it must be terribly serious. Throughout May, daily bulletins concerning the Duke's health were sent to Buckingham Palace. Therefore, the Queen Mother was aware how ill the Duke was, but she was made no attempt to contact him in any way, just as she had not visited him when he'd been in the London clinic in 1965. Dr. Thin revealed later that he was summoned by the British ambassador, Sir Christopher Soames, to be told that the state visit was an enormous political importance. Bluntly, the Duke could die before or after it, but preferably not during it. The ambassador said it would be politically disastrous. If the Duke died during the visit, Dr. Thin succeeded in keeping him alive long enough for the visit of his niece, of whom he was very fond of. Each day during the state visit, the British ambassador telephoned Dr. Thin to inquire, "And how is our friend today?" The Duke's incentive to live was fueled by his determination to see his niece, the Queen. He kept asking Una how many days it was until they came. During the week, the Queen's visit, his condition remained stable. On the 18th of May, the Thursday of the state visit, the Queen went racing at Longchamp, her first ever visit to that course. On her way back, at 4:45 p.m., she called at the house in Bois. With her were the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince Charles, the Duchess of Grafton, the mistress of the robes, and Sir Martin Charteris, her private secretary. The house had been filled with orchids and looked as festive as possible. The Duchess received her visitors, and they had tea downstairs in the library. Sir Martin later recalled that the Duchess sat beneath her 1939 portrait by George Brockhurst, looking hardly a day older than she had been in the picture 33 years before. They talked about anything and everything except one thing on everybody's mind: the poor man dying upstairs. Tea went well, except that the Duchess's pugs were in evident and jumping up and down, something of which the Queen did not much approve. Then the Duchess took the Queen upstairs to see the Duke. He insisted on being dressed to receive his niece. As he pointed out, she is also his queen, and he did not intend to receive her in his pajamas. He was still on an intravenous drip. Dr. Joaquin succeeded in keeping the apparatus well concealed behind the chair in which he was sitting. And so often happens, the version of the witnesses conflict. The correct one is the Duke was seated in the yellow chair with the medical equipment concealed behind it. The Duchess brought the Queen up and left her with the Duke. When the Queen came in, he made a great effort and he rose from the chair to bow to the sovereign before kissing her on both cheeks. When the Queen asked him how he was, he replied, "Not so bad." It was a short meeting, and presently the Queen went down again. The royal party left. Approved press photographers and news cameras were waiting outside as the Duchess led the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince of Wales out into the steps. Photographs were taken. Georges Sanray, the butler, soon stood to the left, and John Utter was also on hand to say goodbye. The Duchess waved as the royal cars departed. Thus the world learned that the Duke of Windsor was dying. The Queen visits sick Duke was the headline. He was too ill to see his Duchess greet the Queen, said another. The next day the Queen returned to Britain. That night the Duke's black pug, Diamond, was restless and did not want to stay with the Duke, which he found very upsetting. During this time, as previously recorded, the Duchess and her friend, Mr. Gardiner, stayed with her. On Saturday evening, 20 May, there was to be a dinner party for her, at which the Duke would not be present. Earlier that day, Dr. Henry Shaw, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, visited the Duke, called in by their friend Robert Bear, who was also present, on the recommendation of Lady Monckton in the hope that something could be done to help the Duke. When Dr. Shaw arrived in Paris on Saturday before the Duke's death, the first thing the Duchess said to him was, "Would you like a bull shot?" He was obliged to drink 2 bull shots and eat a full and formal lunch before he could get near the Duke. He did not like the Duchess, describing her later as just a typical rich, hard American. Dr. Shaw went upstairs and found the Duke in the hands of Una Shanley, an extraordinary Irish nurse, who had him completely in her spell, treating him with the care that might be given to a baby. Shaw observed the Duke and thought him pathetic, with highly childlike blue eyes staring at me with his old beaten-up frame of a body. During the visit, Dr. Shaw had to use the wash basin, but found that he could not turn off the gold taps because of their design. So the basin nearly overflowed while they were talking. Una intervened. "Oh, look now, they turned off this way." The Duke said he was uncomfortable. After a few tests, it was clear to Dr. Shaw that he was riddled with cancer and had no hope of surviving. All he could advise was, just keep on with the treatment. Dr. Shaw got the impression that the Duchess hardly ever went in to see the Duke. Later, he resented not having been paid nor receiving any thanks from the Duchess. The reason was that the Duchess had not asked him to come. He had come at Lady Monckton's behest. It cost him the fare over and a day away from home. The Duke gradually declined during his last week, though he still attempted to get up. On Tuesday, the 23rd of May, there was a dinner party for 12 at the house, in order to be on hand when the time came. John Utter moved into the house. He was frequently questioned by the press and conveyed vaguely reassuring messages which gave nothing away. Only on Friday, the 26th of May, did the Duke not try to leave his bed. That evening his temperature soared and he became delirious. Dr. Thynne came to see the Dukes every evening, noting that once the Duke had achieved the visit from the Queen, he sank rapidly. Usually, Black Diamond, the Duke's pug, allowed the doctor to examine his master without moving. But on 27 May, the doctor came in to find the pug had left the Duke's bed and was sitting by himself on the floor near the bed, thus letting me know that the end was near. Una continued to care for the Duke. She noted that during those last days, the question of having been denied a worthwhile job and the issue of the Duke's title still played on his mind. According to Una, in contradiction to Dr. Thin, on Friday evening, Black Diamond came back to him. The Duchess spent much time with him on Saturday, the last day of his life, and he continued to claim he was not too bad. On Sunday morning, on the 28th of May, at 2:30 a.m., the Duke died peacefully. With nurses Shanley and DeBron on duty, Una put to it, we witnessed the sight of relief and look of peace that descended upon him. He was home at last. The Duchess was awoken and came in to see the Duke in death. Una thought that Giselle de Berry, her maid, took her back to her room. She soon looked an old lady, though a proud one. During the next days, the newspapers, television, and radio were filled with examinations of the life of the Duke, reassessment of the abdication, and accounts of the Duke's life in exile. Sir Charles Peter made the point that at the time of the abdication crisis, there had been no objection to Miss Simpson as a foreigner nor as a commoner. The objection was that she was previously twice married. He told Mrs. Simpson's offer of what he was told of Miss Simpson's offer of withdrawal, but added, it was, however, at once clear that the king preferred abdication to the renunciation of Mrs. Simpson. Following the Duke's death, various distinguished figures called out to the house in Paris, which was surrounded by media for several days. King Umberto of Italy could be seen leaving his car. The mayor of Neuilly, H.L.S. Perret, who was president of the National Assembly, soon followed by Maurice Schumann, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who'd been a young reporter at the wedding of the Duke and the Duchess in 1937. Another who paid his respects was Gaston Paluski. Nancy Mitford wrote to Kitty Mercy, the colonel went to see the Duke's body and came away very low. For one thing, he loved him, and he says the Duke looks so worried. I've never seen a dead person, but I know they generally look peaceful. He also noted that her sister Diana Moseley was concerned that the Duchess had nobody to turn to. Okay, that's a key theme throughout this book. She had no intimate friends. Another inevitable visitor to the house was Mr. Kenyon, the undertaker. He was irritated to find the French police insisted on a gendarme being present at the embalming of the body. On Wednesday, the 31st of May, the Duke's coffin left the house and the boys for the last time. It was stated that the Duchess of Windsor was not well enough to accompany it. She witnessed it leaving the house in Paris with Paul Louis Weiler hovering at her side. John Utter accompanied it to the airport at La Bourge. Arrangements for the Duke's funeral had been agreed between the Queen and the Duke of Windsor since as far back as 1961. And confirmed in private memoranda held at the Palace and Foreign Office since May 1962. Once the Duke died, the Queen's private secretary would inform the Prime Minister, the Lord Chamberlain, and the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Commonwealth Relations Office, and the heir of ministry. He would discuss a suitable date for the funeral with the Lord Chamberlain and the Duchess of Windsor. The Queen would offer an aircraft of the Queen's flight to bring the Duchess over from Europe, or an RAF plane if she was in the United States. In accordance with these long-laid plans, the coffin was flown to RAF Benson in an RAF VC-10. There were 400 men on parade when it arrived, and the central band of the RAF. It was met by the Duke and Duchess of Kent, Lord Jellicoe, Lord Lambton, two ministers acting on behalf of the government whose names were to be linked in a sex scandal that caused them both to resign a year later. Geoffrey de Courcelles, the French ambassador to Britain, Sir Dennis Spotswood, the chief of the air staff, Sir Eric Penn, comptroller of the Lord Chamberlain's office, and others. The Duke's coffin remained overnight at RAF Benson, and early the next morning was driven to Windsor, arriving at 7 a.m. to lie in St. Albert. Arriving at 7 a.m. to lie in the Albert Memorial Chapel in advance of lying in state. One evening that week at dinner at the Mitch, Hampton Court, I overheard a man at another table commenting that it was odd that nobody was wearing a black tie for the Duke of Windsor. He recalled everyone had done so when the late king, had died. I was wearing one. So that is the end of chapter 2, the death of the Duke of Windsor. So we're going to proceed on to the next chapter where they talk about him lying in state. So thank you for listening.